Breaker, breaker.
This is the Latter-day Saint Cowboy Apologist. Call sign TRB, Timber the Man. I'm a rebel riding for truth, roping in false teachings, and defending the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. In the wild west of social media, got your ears on Gassers the Welcome to Daily Gun.
Well, hello and welcome everybody to Mindful Latter-day Saint Christian Living in Apologetics. I am your host, Timothy Berman, here to inspire you, encourage you, and edify you, as well as to provide a response to the ongoing criticisms that percolate via social media. And I know tons of people, well, I'm exaggerating there a little bit, but a lot of people that I know who are in the blogosphere, in the digital content creation arena, specifically within the social media realm, have already provided their insights and take on the most recent Wall Street Journal article written by Georgia Wells, where it is titled Exmo Influencers Mount a TikTok War Against the Mormon Church. And so I have taken some time to read, to digest, to process, and then provide my own response in relationship to this article. And so it is quite shocking that the Wall Street Journal, written by Georgia Wells, claims that the ex-Mormon TikTokers are waging a war on the LDS Church. However, what if faithful Latter-day Saint Christian influencers and content creators are actually winning the hearts worldwide? The Wall Street Journal published this article last week, and it seems to paint a dramatic picture of a, quote, 21st century reckoning, close quote, for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Namely, it is a war of words supposedly driven by ex-Mormon or Exmo influencers on TikTok. However, when we take a closer examination, there is an interesting understanding that becomes quite revealing. And the main thrust of this revelation is the confirmation bias narrative riddled with logical fallacies, outdated tropes, and selective storytelling where it ignores the church's global growth, scholarly advancements, and the thriving community of faithful content creators who are confidently sharing the message of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. A message of hope, redemption, and response, majority with empathy, truth, and love. Now, I'm going to throw my hat into the arena here and provide an op-ed commentary, and hopefully it serves as a mindful point-by-point refutation of Georgia Wells' recent Wall Street Journal article. Again, that article is titled Exmo Influencers Mount a TikTok War Against the Mormon Church. This article also appears over at MSN. Now, I have the content published over at the Patreon community for Mindful Latter-day Saint Christian Living, and there are links there for you to go and check out. Now, this is written from my own perspective. It is written from my own understanding over my own personal experiences over the years, over 30 years of research, study, and engagement within content creation, discussion forums, chats, and now modern social media driven content. And I have engaged in thousands of online discussions through these digital platforms over the years. And at the same time, have come to learn that there needs to be an empathy towards any individual who's struggling with a faith crisis. At the same time, there needs to be a persuasive defending of the church's vitality, the doctrines, the teachings, the heritage that we have come to love and appreciate. And so my aim here in this op-ed commentary is to incorporate historical context, provide a concise, logical analysis to the best of my ability, and share personal insights, highlighting how a lot of the anti-LDS or anti-Mormon rhetoric has evolved while maintaining a stagnation over the years. And so this op-ed essay, this op-ed commentary that I'm providing will explore how Latter-day Saint Christian scholarship has shifted favorably within the apologetic field, as well as within the digital content creation and social media influence that seems to be dominating the digital space regarding this so-called war where the faithful members of the church are winning through authentic, non-contentious engagement. And granted, there are those who are shutting down arguments through contentious discussions and debates. Now, the key themes here is to keep in mind that this is regarding how we as Latter-day Saints are to come to a place where we're still manning common criticisms, exposing the toxic apologetics that proliferate along social media and digital platforms, and celebrate the church's growth amid cultural shifts. So, first, I want to kind of provide some insight and commentary on defending the faith with empathy and evidence. Because as a member of the Latter-day Saint Christian faith or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, my heart over the last several years has ached for many individuals who go through a faith crisis, who are challenged, who experience a crisis of faith. And one example that Georgia Wells points to and opens up her article with is that of Madeline Woodward, sharing her personal struggles with church policies on topics regarding same-sex marriage and historical polygamy being the highlight of this Wall Street Journal's recent article and supposedly expose of the church. Her story of discovery regarding Exmo content on TikTok and then her finding subsequent joy upon leaving the church is poignant and real. I do not diminish what somebody may personally go through because each of us go through a faith crisis, regardless of our faith traditions, whether you're Roman Catholic, Protestant, Lutheran, evangelical, non denominational Christian, it doesn't matter. Any individual will go through not just one, but there are multiple faith crises that we face. And so, faith journeys that are personal are often quite messy and they're fraught with doubt, they're fraught with pain, and a lot of times they're fraught with isolation. And I've personally experienced this myself. And I've seen it over the years with many individuals that I have had conversations with privately. Yet, as we come to a place to empathize with these individuals and their lived experiences, we also want to have the ability and the freedom to be able to scrutinize the more broader narrative that the Wall Street Journal article attempts to construct. And this construction that Georgia Wells attempts to create is one of, quote, reckoning, close quote, where supposedly ex Mormon influencers are attempting to dismantle the church via social media, forcing it to, quote, race to counter them, close quote. And so this particular betrayal, while sensationalistic in nature, or more to the point, it's a modern form of yellow journalism, crumbles under proper critical thinking and proper scrutiny. Because the contributing writer for this Wall Street Journal article relies more heavily on logical fallacies, historical amnesia, and a myopic view that purposefully overlooks the church's overall global growth and the quiet triumph of Latter-day Saint voices through past and present digital content creation, whether they're small content creators and influencers or even large scale content creators and influencers. So, there are 3 points that I want to bring to your attention and address. And so, we want to consider a point by point refutation regarding the article's key claims and countering them with facts, empathy, and faithful informed responses. So, the very first point that the article provides is one that opens with the anecdotal and claim of membership crisis, and then the engagement of cherry picking and appeal to emotional fallacies. When you read Georgia Wells's article, she appears to open up with Woodward's story, framing Woodward's departure as emblematic of seemingly larger idea of this mass exodus and declining membership within the church. And specifically, this is moved into the arena of TikTok and other social media engagement. The article cites statistics concerning U.S. membership growth slowing to under 1% annually and active involvement at approximately 21% globally, and quotes experts like Ryan Burge on a retention problem within the church. Now, here, what happens is we see the employment of the appeal to emotional fallacy, where Wells uses Woodward's personal story to evoke some feigned sympathy and some feigned empathy in order to imply systemic failure within the church. Along with this, Wells also relies on cherry picking data where positive trends data are ignored. So consider the reality here. The church reported a record global growth in 2024, according to the newsroom of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, with a total membership reaching 17,509,781 memberships. And out of that, 308,682 converts being baptized. The highest record in years, where it is bolstered by expansions within Africa as well as elsewhere. Globally, the membership grew by about 125,000 within the past 2 years, contradicting this crisis narrative seen in certain social media networks, for example, Reddit, Facebook, and TikTok. Empathetically, retention challenges really do exist across the board among many faiths amid the rise of global secularism, rise in socialism, and the appeal to Marxist ideology and propaganda. And so, this attack on normative traditional values from religious faith traditions is across the board. It's not systemic within just the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints alone, it is systemic throughout. In fact, American evangelical Christianity has its own so-called mass exodus, yet now they're seeing a resurgence and a sense of revival among a younger generation, where the younger generation are now moving into the coming into faith and coming into attending church and taking faith in Christ seriously. And so, empathetically, when we look at this, retention challenges exist in many faiths amid the rise of global secularism, rise in socialism, and Marxist ideology, an attack on normative family, community, and service oriented traditions and values. Despite these challenges, the church's own emphasis from the Latter day Saint perspective continues to focus on family, focuses on community relations, and service minded attitude and behaviors. And this is what consistently seems to retain many who have come to find and personally experience joy within the teachings and beliefs of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. The second point is portraying Mormonism as particularly vulnerable due to its youth and history. And this is a straw man and hasty generalization fallacy, because here Wells attempts to argue that the church's 1830 founding makes it, quote, vulnerable to social media backlash, close quote, with quote, documents detailing the peccadilloes of its early leaders, close quote, and bringing all of this under scrutiny. This is a strawman fallacy, where she is exaggerating supposed vulnerabilities while ignoring the church's ongoing resilience and vitality. Not only this, Wells seems to negate how every religious faith has faced their ongoing criticisms and historical critiques. Roman Catholicism, evangelical Christianity, Protestantism. And so within the broader context of Christian faith, any religious belief system has come under fire at some point and has endured constant criticism and backlash. Even Christianity's own origins involve certain criticisms and controversy: the denial of the authenticity of the Bible, the denial of Christ's existence, or attributing that Christ did exist, but he wasn't who he claimed to be and was just merely a man, and that the resurrection accounts are suspect. And so, despite the ongoing criticism against the restored gospel, against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints specifically, the church has thrived for nearly 200 years. Along with this strawman fallacy, Wells also commits another logical fallacy where she makes a hasty generalization. The assumption is that there's a very few viral TikTok representations of a widespread rejection. Let me rephrase. Along with this strawman fallacy, Wells attempts to argue and commits another logical fallacy where she makes a hasty generalization, assuming a few viral TikTok represents a widespread rejection, dismissing how organizations like FAIR, originally known as Foundation Apologetic Information and Research, and now known as Faithful Answers and Informed Responses, along with the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Studies out of BYU, originally known as FARMS, Foundation for Ancient Research and Mormon Studies, providing rich, contextual, factual, and faithful responses to issues like polygamy or the priesthood ban. These respective groups were born out of early days of internet pioneer discussions via chat rooms, message forums, and early message boards. FAIR brought together individuals who were volunteered voices where they started responding to common criticisms proliferating along the American online chat and message forums. FARMS being established by John W. Welch in 1979 as a scholarly arm of Brigham Young University, and then changing its name from FARMS to the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship and Studies. Today, Latter-day Saint apologetics has a very rich history, specifically within the digital space. And this actually has surpassed the stage of catching up to Christian apologetics, where it seems to be outpacing the digital landscape of interfaith dialogue, digital religious discussions, and apologetics, and a resurge with fresh scholarly research amid the rise of social media networks. In fact, the supposed war of words on TikTok by Exmo social media influencers is nothing new, as this has shifted from the digital landscape of message forums to Facebook, through Reddit, YouTube, various blog spheres, and now into TikTok. Latter-day Saint apologetics appears to systemically overtaken the digital landscape, with FAIR's YouTube channel, Latter-day Saint podcast, and ongoing written content where nuanced scholarship is offered as a means to address controversial aspects of Latter-day Saint Christian beliefs, living, and teachings, whether it's temple worship, archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, or cultural issues facing modern Latter-day Saints and Christians in general. The digital landscape has provided a very robust response as potential turning points of doubts, crisis of faith, and encouragement for individuals to strengthen their faith and testimonies. The third point that I want to make is this so-called army of hashtag Exmo creators and viral content, where it's nothing more than bandwagon and false dichotomy fallacies at play. The Wall Street Journal article describes an army of ex-Mormon influencers like Alyssa Grenfell, with approximately 1 million followers, emphasizing unalive oaths, wealth fines, and policies on LGBTQ plus issues, leading to supposed rapid departures of faith. This sentiment in yellow journalism actually invokes the bandwagon fallacy, where Wells, the contributing writer of this article, attempts to suggest that popularity equals truth, and a false dichotomy fallacy that pits happier lives outside of the LDS faith where it's pitting it against church membership, where it's seen as oppressive, exclusive. The truth is, many people tend to leave quietly and find fulfillment lives elsewhere, which is fine, which, if that's what they want to do, that's good. However, we ought to do our part to empathize and understand their personal plights. Yet, what we see in the social media atmosphere, the digital landscape, is the persistent and consistent naivety, the ignorance, and even the outright narrative gaslighting of faithful members by implying that the church is inherently repressive, oppressive, and exclusive. And mind you, these are the minority influencers that have garnered popularity and attention. So let's steelman this critique, because critics of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints consistently argue that Joseph Smith's polygamy is seen as being unethical and undisclosed, or that the lack of archaeological evidence disproves the Book of Mormon. So the faithful response that has been consistently coming down through the decades of research, the decades of investigations and scholarly understanding, acknowledges, not deny, the reality of polygamy, despite there being some polygamy deniers within the church, or those who question the historical accuracy of polygamy. The reality is that there's this acknowledgement. It's not a denial. Even though it has been discontinued regarding polygamy, and it is seen as a divine command within its proper context. So, for instance, consider Fair's take on scriptural references to plural marriage in light of the Doctrine and Covenants. And I have that linked in the op-ed article that I have over at the Patreon account for you to view free of charge. You don't have to sign up and become a member, but it's helpful if you want to become a paid member, and that's how you support me. So there's that little plug there for you. And in fact, let me go ahead and do this, that if you want to view that article, you can scan this QR code here. And so here's the faithful response: acknowledges, not denies the reality of polygamy, even though it has been discontinued, and how it was a divine command within its proper scope and context. So consider Fair's take on scriptural references to plural marriage in the Doctrine and Covenants article. As for the argument for a lack of archaeological evidence, it is a straightforward argument from silence, because absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. On the contrary, more and more research and scholarly studies within the Mesoamerican, Latin American, and even North American archaeological landscape is coming forth to substantiate some form and means to authenticate many of the stories and reality of the Book of Mormon as an authentic sacred text. Much of these evidences, taken and isolated of themselves, are very small in nature, yet collectively they tend to stand scrutiny as preponderance of evidence, even if presented in a court of law. Two such evidences that have come forth in recent years is the graphical location of Nahom and the recent evidence of gold-like plate tablets hidden in stone boxes, some of these dating to the same time period as that of the Lehite departure from Jerusalem. And so I'm referring here to the Darius plates, 6 gold leaf-like plates that were found hidden in a stone box. The fourth point regards the church's response and the fight for relevance. This is an ad hominem and slippery slope fallacies. Wells further shows evidence of being out of touch regarding reality when she claims that the church is, quote, racing, close quote, to counter with pro-influencers and ads, noting negative videos seemingly outnumber positive ones and the off-term cult being employed as a common association. This is a very clear and distinct ad hominem in order to portray the church as defensive and cult-like, and presents a slippery slope argument, suggesting inevitable decline. Yet, what Wells appears to ignore, and many of our critics of the Latter day Saint faith ignore, is how polling ignores global perceptions and how the church's official accounts consistently share uplifting messages reaching millions of individuals, whether they're within the fellowship of the Latter day Saint Church as members or without or outside of the church, and they're investigating or they come across these messages and videos. Take, for instance, recent posts on temple renovations and missionary work, or the ongoing contributions of small and large content creators and influencers where family, faith, and service are often highlighted and sharing truth and love, according to Ephesians 4:15. One such example is the visit of President Russell M. Nelson, where he sat with the Pope at the Vatican prior to the dedication of the temple in Rome in 2019. This shows how all faiths adapt digitally, where the LDS Church is not fighting a battle, it is inviting people who are hungering and thirsting for something that is more precious and greater than what they are receiving from secularism and the world. To contextualize this, it requires a brief survey of the historical roots of the so called war and tumult of words. And it begins with understanding the surge of anti Mormonism and rhetoric within the late 1970s. And this began with organized efforts like the Tanner's Utah Lighthouse Ministry, John Ankerberg Show, uh, and those other pioneer anti Mormon ministries, where they produced literature echoing 19th century tropes that started with the first publication of the anti Mormon book, Mormonism Unveiled. And that book was written by somebody who was very antagonistic towards Joseph Smith and the church. And so anti Mormonism and rhetoric surged in the late 1970s with organized efforts like the Tanner's Utah Lighthouse Ministry, producing literature echoing 19th century tropes. For example, polygamy as scandalous, Joseph Smith as a fraud. And then by the 1980s, countercult ministries from evangelical Christianity labeled the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, often referred to and still is today as Mormons or Mormonism, as a cult. So they redefined the term cult from its academic structure and understanding to incorporate other faith traditions that modern evangelicals deem as unorthodoxy or heteroorthodoxy, not in line with the typical orthodox or historical understanding of Christianity. These ministries utilized at the time books, they utilized seminars, and oftentimes various media formats within local Christian congregations. Because you have to remember, this is prior to the internet. This is provided, or this is prior to any easily accessible information. And so, if you wanted to really kind of counter a lot of the anti Mormon tropes that were coming out of Utah Lighthouse Ministry, Saints of Light, Saints Alive, uh, and those other early countercult ministries, you had to have access to a lot of those documents. And a lot of those documents were not easily obtainable within local library systems. And so this produced a lot of people who were unable to respond to. And so when the internet started coming up and people were starting to get into these conversations, hence the foundation of FAIR, FARMS, now Maxwell Institute, uh, the church was playing catch up. There was a race to address a lot of these criticisms and then produce responses to that. And so these ministries utilize books, seminars, and oftentimes various media formats within Christian congregations. One such notable media format is the publication of a book and then the subsequent movie titled The God Makers, which part of that movie continues to permeate throughout social medias by making its rounds and is referred to as the banned Mormon cartoon. and it was written and produced by Ed Decker and his ministry Saints Alive. In fact, interesting side note here, even the Tanners came out against some of the rhetoric that Ed Decker was making. There was a letter that was produced by an interfaith group of people criticizing Ed Decker and his countercult ministry and the way he lambasted and criticized the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This evolved into, once the internet started up, this evolved into forums like Reddit's RX Mormon in the 2000s and continued to persist today. And now via TikTok, where short form videos amplify this sensationalistic viewpoint and conversation. However, as one countercult ministry appears to observe, this is from Reach Out and Trust, and it's titled The Challenge of Mormon Apologists by Michael Thomas of Reach Out and Trust Ministries, says this, quote, perhaps you have noticed that engaging with Mormon apologists is not what it was. The Bible was once the almost exclusive province of the Christian apologists. With Mormons bringing an obviously different gospel, they seem these days better informed, better prepared for the debate. The language of biblical studies and Christian church history sitting more easily with them. Some Christians have found this to be intimidating because the Mormons are coming up with what look like substantive arguments put across with big words. Others have found it frustrating because they know these Mormons are wrong, but can't quite put their finger on what is being said because of how it is being said. We seem to have to be on our mettle these days because the province of Christian history and biblical apologetics seems no longer exclusively our own. Latterly, Mormons appear to have discovered this territory and are determined to put their own spin on it all. What is happening? And this is the first 3 paragraphs of his attempt to refute LDS teachings and belief systems. But there's some truth in this because Christians are now starting to realize that Latter-day Saint scholarship has not only caught up to the criticisms, we are now surpassing the arguments perpetrated through social media networks. That there is now enough information and more information is coming to further confirm the truthfulness of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, vindicating the authenticity of the Book of Mormon, vindicating the reality of Joseph Smith's calling as a prophet to open up the last dispensation and preparing the hearts of the children of men to be prepared for the second coming and the preparation of the restoration of Israel as a nation and as a people and as a faith tradition. However, before Michael Thomas's comments, you have Richard Mouw, who was president of the Fuller Theological Seminary, where he came out and came under scathing criticism by evangelicals for sharing his thoughts, an apology to Latter-day Saints in how evangelicals have consistently engaged in mischaracterization of Latter-day Saint faith and teachings. Quote, Richard Mouw, president of Fuller Theological Seminary, spoke November 14th at the Tabernacle on Temple Square as part of an evening of friendship. The meeting featured Christian philosophers like Ravi Zacharias as a keynote speaker and was co-sponsored by a local group of evangelical ministers called Standing Together Ministries and the Richard L. Evans Chair for Religious Understanding at Brigham Young University. Let me state it clearly. We evangelicals have sinned against you, Mouw said, noting a tendency among some Christians to distort the truth about the beliefs of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have told you what you believe without making a sincere effort, first of all, to ask you what you believe, close quote. And I have this link to where I'm quoting this from in the article. So what we have here is a recognition that comes from provident evangelical Christians where they've taken the time to sit, listen, and participate in healthier interfaith dialogue, rather than engage in the often sensationalistic hit pieces that presents narrow and prejudicial viewpoints from a confirmational biased view, proving time after time that anti-LDS or anti-Mormon tropes and rhetoric consistently fail against scholarly research and defenses. Modern Christian and even atheistic apologetics against the LDS faith have indeed lost footing. often devolving into slippery slope arguments. For example, accepting the Book of Mormon leads to blind obedience. Gaslighting, where it's dismissing faithful experiences as brainwashing or indoctrination. And even narcissistic behaviors, where creators centering videos on personal escapes while mocking and ridiculing sacred practices. For instance, the image of Alyssa Grenfell being prominently displayed on the Wall Street Journal's hit piece article wearing her temple garments, even though she is no longer a believer in God and a believer in the Latter-day Saint faith. On TikTok, this manifests in toxic echo chambers. While Latter-day Saint content creators are rising above this, contending for the faith by not being contentious, where they're articulating the truths centering on the plan of salvation and its inclusivity rather than its exclusivity. And so, with this hit piece article, contrary to Wells' article against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, Latter day Saint influencers, whether they're small faithful members who create content that are faith promoting, missionaries sharing short devotional message styles, devotionals to invite people to investigate the faith, or your large scale content creators with well established platforms and channels, we're actually winning this war and tumult of words. Latter day Saint content creators are consistently and constantly combating regurgitated criticisms from the Exmo influencers and social media campaign, where the attempt and the idea seems to derail and speak against the church, the teachings, and the leaders of the restored gospel. Now, as Latter day Saint content creators, we are doing this by sharing the message of the restored gospel, where we're providing hope for the hopeless regarding who Jesus Christ is, engaging conversations with what their plan of salvation is truly all about, which includes how families are eternal and the ability for each person to receive personal and direct revelation knowledge of the truthfulness. Organizations like FAIR and the Maxwell Institute of Religious Studies and the more recent Interpreter Foundation amplify Latter day Saint voices via social media, all to provide faithful and informed responses and answers to questions on history, doctrine, and policy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. In empathy, I do recognize the toxic pattern of the spirit of contention. I've engaged in it myself, and it is prominent and persuasive within the modern conjectures of the Exmo social media presence and debates. Jude 1:3 urges us to contend faithfully for the faith of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. To many who are doubting, experiencing a faith crisis, I want you to know you're not alone. There are answers, and they are never going to be found among the Exmo sphere of influences social media content creators. Solid answers, backed by scholarly research, will consistently be found among the faithful content creators, official church websites, podcasts, and teachings, as well as the Gospel Library app. Here is the reality. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not crumbling, nor is it racing to respond to criticisms that are outdated, sensationalistic, and riddled with prominent logical fallacies. It consistently responds and opens the invitation for all to come unto Christ, according to Moroni 10:32. This op-ed article attempts to refute the Wall Street Journal's alarmist portrayal by exposing logical fallacies, for instance, cherry picking, strawman argument, and appeals to emotion, and exposes it for what it truly is, a yellow journalistic hit piece where it presents nothing new. The contributing writer, Georgia Wells, essentially comes off as a lazy learner and intellectually castrated because of a lack of diligence in tracing anti-Mormon history from the first publication of Mormonism Unveiled by a disenfranchised member and antagonist of Joseph Smith, to the rise of the countercult ministries of the late 1970s and these arguments that perpetuate ad nauseum throughout the course of human history and modern digital age. Any arguments perpetuated through social media outlets like TikTok, have sufficiently received adequate scholarly responses, showcasing how Latter-day Saint scholarship, digital content creators, and social media influencers are prevailing against the minority of dissent voices that seemingly appear to be amplified in this so-called war and tumultuous words. Exmos, progmos, atheists, and critics of the Latter-day Saint Christian faith consistently fail because of the predominant eisegesis proof texting, the typical employment of logical fallacies, and the perpetual toxic apologetic machinations they are engaging in. Whereas digital content creators, social media influencers, scholarship, Steelman critiques from Latter-day Saint content creators are prevailing in regards to the issues of polygamy, archaeology, cultural, and social issues, reaffirming the church's vibrant future with progressive and vibrant membership growth. In fact, probably one of the main reasons Exmos, progmos, and modern evangelical Christians are actually losing this war of words and are the ones racing to prevail against the consistent outpacing of scholarly research and response from Latter-day Saint influencers and digital creators is because their ongoing perpetual criticism of the LDS faith is the means by which new members are actually coming into the faith, or those who are returning back to the faith. And so, for instance, check out the Comeback podcast. Because of the persistent toxic rhetoric employed by individuals like Alyssa Grenfeld, that is the greatest missionary tool that many people, by way, are coming into the faith and the reality of the truthfulness of the gospel. So, what these social media influencers who call themselves ex-Mormons or progmos, modern evangelicals, they're actually doing more harm than good, because where they're doing harm is they're not actually being persuasive in bringing people out of the church. And while that may be the case, the reality is that because of their social media presence, because of the amplification of their voice, many people are actually having more conversations with Latter-day Saints. They are bringing their questions to Latter-day Saint believers. They are researching the information. And then because of that, they are coming in and reading the Book of Mormon for what it is, and then receiving personal revelation. And because of it, they are joining the church because of the presence and the amplified voices of the criticisms that are coming through short form videos like TikTok or through countercult ministries that continue to perpetuate the ongoing lies. And so the reality is, the conclusion here is that Latter-day Saints are not racing. We're not racing to respond. We were in the beginning, in the early days of the internet, but now we have outpaced that. We now are positioned with better scholarship, better understanding, better grasping, and we continue to have faith promoting conversations. If you want to check out more about what Latter-day Saints believe, check out the official website for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I and other fellow content creators do a Come Follow Me study every Sunday night, and we do that on our platforms. Uh, and so you can do that, view that on Sunday evenings. It is 9 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And I also do my own content creation. You can join Patreon. You can view my articles there, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel and see how I present the information. And all of this, we don't speak for the church. We don't speak for the First Presidency. We speak from our own understanding, from our own research, from our own personal revelations as we continue to grow in faith and come into that relationship with who Jesus Christ is, and continue to grow in our testimony of the message of the restoration of the gospel. And the answers are there. I encourage you to be faithful, to be diligent in your study and understanding of this, and not listen to the noise of the Exmos and the progmos, who are very minor, because they are more like modern day Pharisees and Sadducees, and they have their following, and they will be held accountable for what they have said and what they have done. And I invite any person to come and talk with an actual saint and be open, be receptive, be willing to learn and teachable. And I want to thank you, and I want to encourage you to stay on the covenantal path of righteousness and overcome whatever doubts and faith through the spiritual disciplines, scripture study, prayer, and conversation. Until next time, have a good day, be blessed, be encouraged, and be filled with truth and love. In Jesus' name. Ears on.